All right, we'll get started. My name is Sharon Roberson. I'm president and CEO of the YWCA Nashville and Middle Tennessee. The YWCA's mission is eliminating racism, empowering women, promoting peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. Today's Lunch and Learn is part of a series of conversations that we have with members of our community. At the YW, we say we invite you, we do not indict you. So hopefully we'll provide you with information that you will need. So when you go about in your various communities, that you'll be able to provide information that will help uplift our society. Today's Lunch and Learn examines injustices that exist in our society for those who have substance abuse disorders and mental health matters. Justice and dignity requires that we as a society provide humane solutions to address these critical issues. Mental health equity is so important, and we must make this a goal of our society. At the YW, with the work that we do, we know all too well what happens when issues of childhood trauma are not addressed and the psychic toll that it takes. We also understand the negative coping mechanisms of substance abuse and how it can destroy lives. We'll explore these issues with a wonderful panel that is here today, the experts, so to speak, to let us know what we need to do when we go out into our communities to support those who are often marginalized and often misunderstood. We want to get away from this idea that when you have a substance abuse disorder, that there's a character flaw, that you are weak and you should be shamed and stigmatized. Our panel is featuring leaders in our community, and they are those who work most closely with these vulnerable members of our community. First of all, I would like to thank those who have supported us in this initiative. The Nissan Foundation for making these webinars possible and also free. Also Alliance Bernstein, our latest partner in this initiative. Through these conversations, we hope to build community, spark dialogue, and build a consciousness of legacies of discrimination and oppressiveness. Now I'll get started. I will ask each of our panel members to introduce themselves. I'll start with Ms. Pamela Sessions, also a former leader at the YWCA.
I'm Pamela Sessions. I'm the CEO at Renewal House. And for those of you that aren't familiar, Renewal House provides specialized addiction treatment for women and primarily women that have children. So if a woman has a substance use disorder, she wants to come into treatment, she can come to Renewal House, participate in our program, and bring up to 2 children with her. And so I look forward to talking to you today about substance use disorders and the stigmatisms that are exposed or discussed in the community about our client population.
Carol Westlake.
Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here. I'm Carol Westlake. I'm the executive director of the Tennessee Disability Coalition. The Disability Coalition is an alliance of 43 different disability groups across the state. We're a statewide organization that are all working together to try to build communities that value, support, and include people with disabilities. We are all about doing policy and advocacy work and empowering self-advocates to be able to make a difference in their own lives and in the lives of their families and communities. Glad to be here.
Thank you. Mr. James Bush.
Hello, my name is James Bush. I'm a licensed professional counselor in the state of Tennessee and a bunch of other states. I am the treatment director of Youth Overcoming Drug Abuse, a facility that helps individuals, 13 to 18-year-olds, who are suffering from substance abuse. I'm also a clinical consultant to juvenile criminal court.
All right, well, thank you. So let's get started. Now, we do know that addiction, disability, and mental health are interconnected. What I would like for each of you to address is how do these connections inform the work that you do? I'll start with you, Mr. Bush.
Well, one of the things that I've recognized is that nothing happens. I mean, it's not an addiction only service. That's something that a model that we had maybe back, maybe 15 or 20 years ago, but now we've moved to more of a co-occurring model. So it's not just about the addiction itself, it's about the person's resources, it's about their lifestyle, it's about their mental health, their physical health, the capacities that they have at their fingertips. And so how many know that if you don't have something to eat, then is probably worrying about a substance abuse issue will be something more of a challenge to you. If you are suffering from an ailment in your body or anything like that, and you don't have the necessary medical services to see to that, then you smoking a blunt probably would be more beneficial to you because it's mentally taking you somewhere. So you cannot just isolate one addiction or one situation from another. You have to take these things all into context. And when we do that, we can develop a more strategized attack to help that individual with the challenges that they are facing, so that one, that when they go and fill out for that application to get that job, that they don't pop for a drug screen that's positive for cannabis, positive for opioids, positive for methamphetamines, and et cetera, that they can also then go and get that job and maintain that place of employment in case something does happen.
All
And I
right,
want to,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, I want to piggyback just on what James says. At Renewal House, although substance use disorder is the primary diagnosis for women that come into treatment here, about 95% of the population of women that we serve also have a mental health issue. So they have co-occurring disorders. So we have to make sure that we not only address the addiction, but we also have to make sure that they have the resources in place to deal with the specific mental health issues. And then there are times that we have women that come, they also have some disabilities that they're trying to navigate, that we work with them to address as well. So we are a multifaceted agency, because we are not just addressing one issue, we're having to address all of their concerns, and we have to make sure that we don't leave any of them out. And that's very important, because frequently the client population that we serve, it's very difficult for them to navigate all of those things separately.
Yeah, I think that's just a really important point, and it is so important for the services that both of you provide, because that's certainly our experience. And as we take a look at how we can improve supports and services, we're kind of trying to make sure we look at that whole person. I mean, I think, and Pam, I think your experience really speaks to this. People with disabilities are much more likely to have a substance use disorder than the general population, and they're less likely to get treatment, frankly. That's
Sure.
just been our experience. It is also true in our world, we find that people who have addiction or substance use disorders are more likely to become disabled, right? So we think, I mean, disability is a pretty broad area.
Mhm.
And people can be born with disability, they can acquire disability through accident, injury, age. Oftentimes with addiction, the long-term effects of abuse can cause disability. And accidents and injuries can also cause disability. So, and then in our world, we also really see that for people who have disabilities sort of coming into the world, the lack of support, trauma, as Sharon mentioned, sort of childhood trauma, and particularly as a child with disabilities, often contribute to mental health disorders as well. So, there's an estimate for people with developmental disabilities, those disabilities that happened before they were at the age of 18. About 60% of those folks also have a co-occurring mental health disorder. I
Mhm.
mean, those things just, the connection is complex, and it's important. And this sense of treating the whole person, and making all of those services available is just really critical.
And when you talk in terms of how the cross-section of substance use disorder, disabilities, and mental health, when we look at the things that people are facing, how does that inform the work we do? I talked a little bit about making sure everyone has the appropriate resources. I think one of the things that we see at Renewal House is for women that come into our setting and they have a substance use disorder, and maybe they have a disability because of something that's happened previously. It could be a pretty significant or serious mental health issue. So they come in sometimes, and then once they start to feel better, they're like, oh, I want to go to work now. And they may think, they can get out there, they can go full force, and then they go to work. But, we have to also remember that there are other challenges, and we're going to work with them. And so if they want to go to work, we want to make sure they can go to work. They can go to work in a place that's going to be beneficial for them, but also not jeopardize their disability benefits or jeopardize or compromise any other things that they have in their life that's going well. Because I think sometimes, you know, in our society, when people appear to be doing better, we want to take all the resources away from them and cut their benefits and cut things that are really helping to keep them in the maintenance mode. And so we really spend a lot of time here working with our moms when they have a substance use disorder, they are recovering, they want to go to work, but they've also experienced a pretty significant mental health issue and, you know, they're on medication. And so we have to keep all of those things in mind.
Yeah.
All right, more of a holistic approach.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. James Bush, let's go to this, because one thing in having these series of lunch and learns, no matter what the topic is, and no matter what societal challenges exist, it tends to affect those in the marginalized communities more so than the other part of the population. What these issues we've been discussing, how are they treated differently for members of our marginalized community? I'm talking about young people you're familiar with, Black people, all sorts of people of color, and women. How does it play out in your work?
Well, a couple of things that come to mind is the words consistency and relatability. When you have sometimes those young people or people of a marginalized community do not have the resources to be able to take part in the help or the aid that they need on a consistent basis, then it presents a challenge. So for instance, if I have a young man who's coming to see me for services and he's told me his story and he's just divulged lots of information, he feels comfortable, he's relating to me, but all of a sudden I get another opportunity somewhere else and that's making a lot more money, that's a lot more beneficial, the hours is not as long, my caseload is not 40, it's maybe 20 or 15. And then now that young man has to go and tell his same story to a whole nother individual that he has to go and start the process over again and build that rapport and get comfortable with being in that space and taking that clinical journey with them. That's huge. That's a lot of our young people. That is a lot of our marginalized communities as well, or anything like that. Also, too, if you have the thing of family support, sometimes families are not able to take part in those services because of maybe they're working, maybe they have, you know, other responsibilities that they need to take care of or so. And so the lack of support in that area, it kind of harms them, as opposed to other communities that I've seen where they're, whether it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon or 7 o'clock in the evening or so, there's this big family session, there's this big wealth of support that they have, and they're already planning and plotting a strategy of how they can bring that other person out of that dysfunctional situation. So I say relatability, consistency, and support are those big items that need to be addressed.
All right, Carol, same question.
Yeah, so I think that we fail too often to really recognize sort of the intersectionality that faces marginalized communities from a disability perspective, right? So, you know, so we know that people with disabilities tend to be less educated, probably live in poverty, have challenges, you know, in employment and discrimination, and then you layer on minority status, or you layer on being a woman, and that, and we know the same thing about, you know, the minority communities tend to live in poverty, have that, you know, have those other kinds of challenges. And so you've really ended up with sort of this double whammy. And if you don't recognize the intersectionality of that, and I mean, and as James was just saying, you know, I mean, if somebody is trying to figure out how they're going to put the next meal on the table, it's really hard to spend a lot of time on your recovery or on, you know, other kinds of things, right? And when disability creates a huge transportation challenge and you can't even get to, you know, a treatment center or afford it for a whole range of things, it's really, really challenging. So I think that understanding that sort of intersectionality with marginalized communities, disability, mental health, addiction, and how removing those barriers to discrimination and how we can build a cohesive and collective purpose around raising everybody up is just so very critical.
I want to add to that. People have their own perspectives about other people. And on many occasions, all of the influences drive how people see other people and how people engage them. So one of the things that I hear frequently about our women that we work with, I always say our moms, because the majority of our women here are mothers, or they are mothers. People sometimes will say, well, you know, those women are on drugs and they're just lazy and they don't want to work. And you hear a lot of negative conversations in the community about our clients. But actually, women who are in recovery are not lazy. And if you look at the research, you will actually see that folks in recovery are some of the best employees ever. And there are great benefits for organizations and companies to want to, or they should want to hire people that are in recovery. First of all, people that are in recovery generally are filled with gratitude and lots of thanks because they have an opportunity to have a second chance. Secondly, they have something to prove. They feel like they have to prove that now that they are in recovery, they can be positive, contributing citizens to the community. And that's very important. And then the final thing that we think, when I think about them in terms of being good employees, is that they need opportunities to be in the workforce. It keeps them busy. And what the busyness does is it fills that free time, and they are now working instead of abusing or misusing a substance. So I think generally when we think about folks that are in recovery and we think about people that have a mental illness or a disability, we really need to step back and reframe our thought process about how we are viewing people.
That is really so true and so important. I mean, we spend a lot of time in our community talking about and calling out ableism, right? I mean, you know, when we think about racism a lot as a broad community and other kinds of isms, but the truth is people's perception of addiction, substance abuse, mental health, and disability is terribly ableist, and it really and it's not always evil, you know. It is implicit bias in so many cases. But you're exactly right, Pam. I mean, it's kind of like we assume that these other folks who are this way or look this way or have been in treatment are something, and there's something other than us, and that makes it really difficult.
Yeah, a society makes it as a practice to try to separate yourself from anyone that has any issues that society has judged or not, or bad, so to speak, or sinful or something, or weak. I mean, these all
or whatever it is,
in place, whatever they want to. I will say this: a good friend of mine, Judge Melissa Blackburn, and also Judge Sheila Calloway, who, James, I'm sure both you're very familiar with both of these individuals. And one of the things that Melissa Blackburn has really pushed for a long time is a mental health court. And I think also Sheila Calloway has done a number of things in the juvenile court system to make things more equitable, especially for people that have various substance abuse disorders and mental health challenges. Let's go into that, because often the criminal justice system and really the court system as a whole has been very punitive. Once you have the label of someone that's lesser than, you're weaker than, you have this disorder, you know, how could you be a mother and be addicted to something? This is horrible, you're a bad person. The system treats you very differently and often negative. And so these particular judges are working toward dismantling that system. Let's start with you, James. Let's talk a little bit about how the work you do interacts with or responds to some of the punitive aspects of the criminal justice system.
Well, first and foremost, I mean, I work with the juvenile criminal court system. We work with, again, as a consultant, family treatment court, as well as a drug court consultant. But I must say that I am not a court official to some extent. I do not operate under a code annotated. I am a clinician, and my job is to help my clients get to the desired outcomes that they are in need of. So motivational interviewing, helping them move through the stages of change, helping them reframe some of the traumas and the traumatic situations in their history, not being as punitive, showing unconditional positive regard. Those are some of the things that are my tools that I'm utilizing to help them. Now, the court may not use the same tools that I'm using, but my thing is that a lot of my clientele, this is not their first rodeo with the court system. They've been in over and over and over. And for some, they've been conditioned to believe that the book is either going to be thrown at them or that they're going to have some uber consequence that they're going to suffer at the end of that gavel. My job is to continue to reassure them hope, help hopeful connections. And I think that's what a lot of us need in this day and age when a lot of the situations are dire within our communities, much less the justice system.
Mm-hmm. James, I love when you said, we instill hope, and that's what we offer to people, because basically I feel like we are advocates for people who don't have a voice or are afraid to use their voice, or their voices have been silenced. Yeah. And that is really a role that we play heavily in the community. When I think about Renewal House and the work we do here, we, a significant amount of our population last year came to Renewal House from incarceration. And we've had so many situations where we have seen, and I'm not a court authority either, so I'm just speaking based on my experience here. So I'm not trying to nail anybody. I'm just trying to state the facts around what has happened. We have seen situations where a woman and her significant other have been arrested because of some drug charge, and her significant other gets out and the woman is still there. And so we're trying to figure out why is that happening? Or we've seen situations where women have gone to court. They were scheduled to come to Renewal House. They get to the court, and then they find out there's a charge for them in another county, and then they end up not coming to Renewal House, or they go back to jail, or they go to a jail in another county. Mm-hmm. And so we spend a lot of time advocating for our clients, going to court, speaking on their behalf, talking about they are recovering, they are good moms, they've completed their parenting classes. And I feel like it's becoming more and more of something that we're required to do, and that's just advocate for our clients all around in every situation. It could be at a doctor's appointment. It's just something that we're constantly doing.
Carol, it seems as though there's this common theme of the lack of appreciation for the needs of those who have a mental illness.
Absolutely, yeah. And so there are a couple of things. I mean, some of the work that we have done in advocacy and policy has really backed up even to police training. Right? I mean, like you get in the criminal justice system eventually, right? But when we criminalize homelessness, and we know that the mental health needs of folks who are homeless are just huge, right? I mean, and then oftentimes a mental health disorder might lead to homelessness. Mm-hmm. You criminalize that, what are you doing? You're really criminalizing the disability at that point. And that is true. There's a lot of folks with disabilities who get involved with the criminal justice system through the police, and police don't understand interactions with people with disabilities, mm-hmm. how to deal with somebody who's got a mental illness or some other kind of disability where they might not communicate in ways that you're expecting. So, I mean, I think it really starts at the street level. I do think that the growth of mental health courts, the growth of drug courts, I mean, all of those things are helping to, I hope, to decriminalize. You all probably have a lot more to do that with that directly than I do, but those are the kinds of policies that we have really been trying to work on to make sure that the criminal justice system treats people appropriately, that it's accessible. I mean, I think that that accessibility issues are really huge and oftentimes get people into trouble as well. Mm-hmm. And so figuring those things out will help make things better, but we've got a long way to go.
We do. And I think, Carol, we have to remember, and incarcerating someone that has a substance use disorder or has a mental illness, clearly it is not fixing the problem. And so I think we have a significant amount of education to do in our community. I know it's 2023, but in some ways, when we start to talk about these issues and how people are criminalized and not getting the support they need, I feel like it's, I don't know, 1950. And when you're dealing with it every day and you're hearing clients share their stories with you, it feels very heavy. It feels like there are times that we are just clearly not making the progress that we need to be making with given all the resources that we have.
And I think that's really, really true. Because so I think that, so we need to start taking a look at those institutions and those supports and services and those structures that are failing people and getting and so that they end up in a criminal justice situation,
And we have at the YW sponsor a 21-day challenge. And one of the things that we looked at in that 21-day challenge is how the structure of society is such that we do not respond as a society well to those who are different, who have mental health issues. And as a result of the lack of a positive response by society, we end up with individuals who cannot overcome their issues. What kinds of short-term and long-term institutional supports do we think for individuals living with substance abuse disorder or mental illness? What type of supports do you think would be helpful? I'll start with you, James.
Well, one thing I would say is that maybe 21 years ago, if you would enter a local religious facility or whatnot, you were told that going to a therapist was not a good thing, that you had a demon upon you. So we got to get rid of that stigma. We have to begin to normalize mental health, normalize these disabilities that we are facing. We have to have that has to be along the same conversation as someone who is suffering from cancer, suffering from high blood pressure, hypertension. We've done a long way to normalize those other items, but we have to go a little bit further, because if we don't do that, then we run the risk of having this stigma and this outside effect of, okay, well, I'm okay, but you've really got a problem. And that separate ideation, that does nothing for our community, because now we have young people who are afraid to express themselves, and then they end up doing something that is very heinous and atrocious that everybody feels in our community, because none of this stuff happens in isolation. So we have to have more information on these treatment services. Also, too, we have to have more therapists that are culturally competent, that are informed to work with this population, these clienteles. Because if we don't do that, then it takes 6 months, 3 months for someone who's looking for help to go see somebody. That's atrocious. That's obnoxious. When I'm going through something, if I'm going through something in my body, I want to see a doctor tomorrow if I could, not next week, not 6 months. But unfortunately, COVID taught us that sometimes getting in to see somebody, it took you about 2-3 months because there was a backlog. So we need more trained professionals that are able to offer services based on an EAP affiliate agreement or whatever. People need the sessions. It's not like one of these one-offs where you can just go and say something, you speak well into them, and you make them feel good, emotionally high and everything, then you go away with it. They need the sessions. They need the consistency. But without that, we have much more of the same.
All right, Pamela, in your programming, you deal very much with women who are working in their programs to overcome substance abuse disorder. What kind of solutions, what can our society put in place to better support that population?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. James kind of hit on it, but I just want to say, first of all, when I think in terms of short-term supports, I think we see a lot of women at Renewal House that come here and they need detox. So we will refer them out to get detox. Some women just need some short-term therapy. They need to be able to go and see someone for 30 days. Maybe they haven't relapsed, or we identify some issue that they need to work on immediately to prevent that relapse. And frequently those resources or those interventions can be short-term. When I think about long-term, I think about people that need services that could be up to 2 years. I have to give a shout out here to Renewal House. I think the one reason that our program has become so successful is women can come in, they can participate in treatment, and as long as they're working their treatment plan, they can stay here. So there is no term limit on that. And that's what, so that's what I think in terms of long-term care. I think the one challenge for women in recovery is that there's a very limited number of places, very few places still across the country where women can go and participate in substance use disorder and bring their children with them to live during that time. And then I want to just say one thing briefly about what James just said. The real problem is access. We say that there are a lot of treatment programs around, but I think the access is still limited because we saw very clearly during the pandemic, it could take months sometimes for people to get involved or engaged in treatment. And that's a real issue because my experience is if somebody is in active addiction and they call you and they say, I want help, they want help now. They can't wait until 2 weeks from now. And they say that to you all the time. And so that continues to be a real challenge that we need to figure out how we can manage that better and differently, because we know often we lose people when they can't get the help they need immediately.
I think that's really true. And I would back that up even further. I mean, not only do we need to continue to work on destigmatizing so that people will reach out for help, we have to make that outreach easily accessible. Do you know, I mean, oftentimes people don't know where to turn or really have trouble navigating. And I think that disability and mental health issues complicate that. Did you know? So even though we have a problem at the access point, when people do get to help, we have to help people get there first. We need better and more workforce and different kinds of model programs that people will have access to and ways to navigate folks to those correct programs. We experience sometimes, I mean, not only do people have trouble getting access to the mental health treatment they need, if they have a significant disability, there are programs that just can't serve them, right? So and those folks have sort of a physical access problem sometimes. We don't serve folks with intellectual disabilities, or we can't accommodate you if you're in a wheelchair, or we can't, and that's a problem as well. So I think that those things are just really, really important. The other thing that I would lift up, I think, in terms of our system of supports and services that has been really successful in our community, is to really build out a peer support model. I mean, I think there's lots and lots of folks who are doing lots and lots of good work, but one of the things that really resonates in our community is when people see people who are like them, right? Who also have a disability, who also have experienced a mental health disorder and are in recovery, or who have a substance abuse disorder and are in recovery, or all three, which is sometimes that really happens. But it really, I think, is a good way to expand access, right? And really help make programs, I'm going to say welcoming, for lack of a better word. I'm kind of losing my my language here, but I think that really will make a difference in terms of of access for folks.
One of the very frustrating aspects is, the YW, our largest programming is in the area of domestic violence services. And one of the most frustrating aspects of that for family members is the individual leaves the abusive situation, goes back, leaves and goes back, and families often get frustrated because they're looking at it, why should I hang in here? This person has, keeps going back. The same thing often happens with someone because mental illnesses are very chronic. You can have very chronic, substance abuse disorder situations. Often family members, friends get frustrated. The individual gets frustrated with themselves. What can you tell us to really help us understand and how to better cope with these chronic situations? I'll start with you, Pam.
Well, we hear that a lot, and lots of family members and friends do get frustrated. I think we have to encourage them to hang in there with their family members and friends and support them as long as they can. And I'm not saying that's easy. I think I need to be very clear about that, because when you see, people leave a domestic violence situation and return multiple times, Sharon, I know that quite well. And it's the same here when we see women who have been in, we've seen women that have been in short-term treatment programs and they've been through 5 times. And then the family members come and they feel so, so frustrated. And so I think the thing that we do is, although it's hard, I have to continue to say that it's hard. Try to support them the best that you can. Encourage them to, participate in their AA meetings, or encourage them to see their sponsors. We know that neither family members nor friends or any of us can do the work. The person has to want to do the work. And so we just have to be there to support them as best we can. And I think that's one of the good things about women who come here and they participate in treatment. We can be a little more direct and say difficult things to clients, whereas their families and their friends may not be able to. But just, continue to encourage them to get help, because for many of the women that we see that have gone through treatment before, they come here and they do well. And I think the reason that they're able to do well is because they can stay here for an unlimited amount of time. And so while we have the time and we can support them and we can have patience, it becomes more challenging for family members and friends who have gone through that with them repeatedly. But I'm a social, even though I'm the CEO at Renewal House, I am a social worker first. And I always want to make sure that someone else has another chance, another opportunity, because I always think you can do it until you just can't do it. And so you get a lot of you can do it. You get a lot of you can do it's over here. And I believe in you. And I know you can, even when someone just told you, well, this didn't go well. But I'm like, it may not have gone well this time, but the next time it may be better than you ever anticipated, and you can do this.
Yeah. So I want to go back to James's cancer analogy, because I think, part of the problem is, and I know families are frustrated, but sometimes it's because, Sharon, as you said, it is because people don't understand that this really is a disease. It's not a weakness. It's not a, right? And families don't understand that. And we would not, as a family, address a cancer, like, so your cancer came back and somehow that's your fault. And, right? No, we're all traumatized when your cancer comes back, and we're all up for the next fight to try to stop it, right? And that's true. Mental health can be a real cyclic, right? I mean, you can be in recovery and something can re-trigger the disease, just like cancer. And I think we have to help families understand. We have to help people understand that for themselves, and we have to help families understand that. And maybe that gives us a little more patience. It can be really hard with a family member with cancer as well. I'm not going to minimize that at all, right? But I think, thinking about these conditions, disabilities, substance abuse disorders, and mental health as what they are, which are chronic disabling conditions that do require treatment, they do require work. But in the case of mental health and substance abuse disorders, it can come back, right? And just like other kinds of things.
And Carol, here's what else we all need to remember, even specifically for those of us who are on the call, or those of us who are working in the field, whether it's a substance use disorder, whether it's a mental illness, whether it's the going through the cancer process, these things are all journeys. It's not a marathon and we're over after the 5-mile run. Like, these are lifelong journeys that we take with the folks that we're working with.
All right, and it's amazing because some of the family members that are hardest to work with are often those that have a hand in creating the situation, even if it's by sheer genetic structure, they help create it and then they get very upset. James, anything to add to this conversation?
One of the things I would say is that inform yourself, educate yourself on that which your loved one is suffering from. A lot of times we go off of anecdotal information as opposed to evidence-based information. And no, you don't have to have a PhD or a Master's of Arts degree, man, to kind of understand those things. It's just a simple Google search. We search for everything else in the world. We can search for those items as well too to kind of help us out with it. So informing yourself, educating yourself, letting you know that, again, what Pamela said, it is a journey, but also along with that, practicing your own level of self-care, because sometimes that individual, they do burn out when they're seeing things and their expectations of what they believe to happen are not being met. You know, go for a walk, take a break, you know, get out the house, you know, go and see if you can find a respite, you know, find support systems who can give you a spell or a rest at some point in time, so that you can be more refreshed and able to look at the situation or what is happening within your household or with your loved one, as opposed to now you're emoting because you're tired, you're frustrated, and then you're the individual who's going through the situation that he's going through or she's going through, they're kind of feeling worse and they're kind of feeling kind of unnerving or nervy because, you know, they're in this because of me. I'm getting on their nerves. And so that's not helping their overall treatment. That's not helping their betterment to finding peace in that moment. You know, it takes a community of individuals, supports and everything. But if we don't have everything in its proper place, then we have those negative outcomes where people just say, you know what, I might as well continue to use, man. This is no hope and it's not going to get any better. So self-care, educating yourself, finding support system, find people who know about what you are going through and who have been there, who can speak life into your system. Sometimes it's not your pastor. Sometimes it's not your coworker. You know, they're there for just possibly gossip, but you want someone who can help you specifically. And I think that'll do a whole wealth of good for you.
All right, we had a question before I get to the final question from the chat. We were asked, why don't we have, I guess, separate mental health emergency rooms? So if you're picked up in a crisis, I don't even know if that exists or not. I'll start with you, Carol. You might have more input into this.
I don't know why we don't have those. I will say that the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill and the NAMI and several other organizations have really been working hard on sort of crisis units. I mean, you don't always, you know, sometimes you do need to take somebody somewhere, you know. But the other piece is just being able to deliver crisis services where someone is, because oftentimes trying to transport somebody somewhere is even more traumatizing, you know, than when they're having a mental health crisis. We've spent a lot of time in our community talking about how it is not particularly functional to handcuff and throw in the back of a police car somebody who's having a mental health breakdown to get them to an emergency room. But I do think that we need specific and available treatment options and crisis options, both in terms of a place and in terms of mobile crisis to be able to deal with folks. And I think that makes a really big difference.
All right, James, let's say we're a teen that's in crisis and the parents don't know what to do. Of course, what's the first thing people do? They call the police. I've been there myself at the Weaver Center, calling the police at the Weaver Center. We have a child in the Weaver Center that's in crisis. I've actually found, and we've had some tremendous social workers. I actually sent a police officer away from this. I said, we'll just handle this, because he was going to take the child to a juvenile court, and I didn't realize how limited the resources are. What is the best thing to do? You're a parent, you have a teenage child or even a child period that's in a mental health crisis. What's the first person they should call? Who should they call?
Well, one of the things is that, I mean, sometimes, believe it or not, those services, whether it's the local authorities, they have connections and they have ties with other mental health, community mental health agencies or whatnot. And that's the pipeline they get to. So for instance, when we're assessing or doing an evaluation, a lot of the times the young man or young lady has come in for something else. And it's not until we do that evaluation that we find out that they do have some other underlying mental health trauma or situations. So it takes a village. It's a community of individuals. However, whatever your first notion is to get help or seek aid or so, I would say do that. Sometimes it's taking them to the hospital. If you have a young man who is high on Xanax and he goes to the hospital, guess what? It's probably not a bad thing, because he's going to be connected to possibly to a social worker who's going to connect him to other resources in the area, in the community, to kind of get that work done. Now, the follow-up is for that parent to continue to take him to those services on a consistent weekly or bi-weekly basis or anything like that. So make your next move the best move, whether it's, taking them to the hospital, calling authorities, calling a teacher, calling a principal or whatever. These individuals, they have, a laundry list or a phone book or a black book of source of resources in their area that can help those young people.
All right, Pam, we had a question on the cycle of family substance abuse disorder. You deal with the women, they're there, you work with them, that is, at Renewal House, they bring their children with them. What helps our child not fall into the same cycle of addiction that they see their mother in?
Well, I think the thing that we have to do is start working with the children early on. That's something that we do here. And it's very important that, number one, if we can get the mom sober, if we can get the mother to work to improve her parenting skills so that she is able to meet the needs of her child and get the resources that they need, that will begin to help them all get on the right track. So we really have to get the adult member in the family stabilized first, because often what we see is when we can get the adult stabilized, then that's going to help the child so much. And it's very important for us to get the mother and the child as soon as possible. I had someone visiting here earlier today and they were like, oh my goodness, why are there so many pregnant women here? And so I'm like, if we can get a mom when she's 3 months pregnant and she becomes sober and she stays here with us through her delivery, we can help her make some significant cognitive and behavioral changes in her life. And she's going to begin to formulate and create patterns and structure that will help her for her future. All the women that go through Renewal House and are successful, the one thing I always remember them coming back and saying to us is that you provided me with structure. I learned how to create a routine, and that helped me moving forward in my life. And so I think if we can do that for the adults, that will help them be able to bring their children along. And we have to get to these children early. When we start work, when we see moms come in sometimes and we start working with their children, and I mean, I'm not saying it's not possible, but it's much harder when the child has been exposed to so many things and he's 7 or 8 years old. It's much more difficult to change those behaviors than when you're working with someone that's very young. Maybe they're an infant, maybe they're a toddler, maybe they're 3 or 4. And so we just have to get that foundation made and bring the children along with the mother. And we've seen a lot of successes here with that. I just want to quickly share a success story. I think one of my favorite stories that I like to share is about a woman that came here shortly after I did. She was pregnant. She had her baby here. She had some college, but she had gotten into her addiction pretty heavily. She stayed here long enough with us to complete our program. She lived 3 years in our transitional housing. She finished her master's degree while she was here, and now she's working in the community. And so I've known her for 7 years. She's still sober, and she talks about all the things that she learned here and how she changed her behavior. And her son is doing well. And I think it's because of the work that she put in on the front end to help them get where they are today.
Perfect. Carol, anything to add?
Well, I was just going to say that as you're talking about that, Pamela, reminds me about, the work that's been going on in this state around adverse childhood experiences, right? I mean, you do need to get kids young if you can. And what we've learned about brain development in the research and the impact of trauma and other kinds of adverse experiences. I mean, so it really is important to be able to work hard to break that cycle, and to get healthy kids that are not going to end up down the same path.
Yes, most definitely. Now, this is a very good question. I want you all to take your time to respond to this, because this is important, because this work is hard. All of you have chosen a path that on any day can be one of the most disappointing things that you'll ever experience, when you have people that don't live up to the expectations they have for themselves. That's what hurts me more, when people have all these dreams for themselves and they falter, but that is part of it. What are your personal experiences that inspire you to do this work? First of all, it is difficult, it is challenging, but I will say it could be some of the most rewarding work you'll ever do. I'll start with you, James. Why do you take on this? Why is this your personal mission?
Well, whenever anybody asks me why I do what I do, I said, this field chose me. I didn't choose it. And I think one of the biggest things that I've noticed is that when you're gifted with the attitude of unconditional positive regard, congruence, where you can see a situation, you don't necessarily agree with a lot of your clientele or what they're doing, what their behavior is, but you understand. And when you understand, you can offer grace. Now, I take it, it was a clientele of mine not too long ago, young man, came in, was doing all kinds of things, smoked, drank, had problems with his parentage. Matter of fact, actually stole a car to come to group, which was funny. He stole a car to came to group and actually took somebody home in that stolen car. And naturally the police, they caught it with him and, pull him to the side and everything like that. But the fact is that you can see where his heart is, just misguided. It doesn't have a lot of support systems in his life to kind of help give that guidance or direction. But that same kid could later on go on to complete our program, to get off of probation, and to not get involved within the criminal court system for years to come. And you say to yourself, you were a part of that because you didn't give up. You didn't just go and just throw the towel away, or throw the key away and just say, they're just a bad, or they're just too old, and nah. And that's the rewarding part of this, when you can create those relationships and when you can show individuals, because a lot of times people don't know, they don't care what you know, they just know that you want to know that you care. And I think that's so important in the sense is that we need more people who are relatable and actually care and are willing to work with individuals who are in some very dire situations. They didn't get into this stuff overnight. They didn't just start smoking and then all of a sudden now they move to this person they are right now. It took some time. It's traumatic situations. I'm not gonna lie, God knows, I'm supposed to be a treatment director or whatnot, but for some of these kids in the neighborhoods they're in, and they're afraid to walk down them, and they're like, I can't stop smoking. I'm like, well, you know what? Smoking a blunt is not one of your biggest problems right now. Because of the neighborhood you're in. In the gunfire and the carnage and the violence and everything that's going along with that. And yet you have not seen anybody to talk to these things about, and people are suppressing you and they're downing you because you have these feelings and these experiences. And so, yeah, I understand why you smoke. I understand why you drink. I understand a lot of times why you do the things you do. I think it takes those types of individuals that can take that same information, that same observation, but also spin it. Also, I get why you're here, but here's potentially a way out from that.
Okay, Pam.
So I think I've always had a personality that desires to help people. And I said this previously, I believe that everybody deserves a second chance. And I think I have just learned over the years that when people have challenges, if we can just work with them without so much judgment, because they've already been judged so much in their lives, that we can help them make some very positive changes. And when I think back over all the women that I have seen come through Renewal House, and particularly the ones that are, doing well, and their children are doing well, and they're getting jobs, and they're going to school, and they're reuniting with other family members, it just brings me a lot of joy. So just to know that that is possible, even in a society that we live in today where people are often ostracized, I think that there is so much more positive and so much more that people can be and so much more that they can do. And I do this because I want to be a part of that. And so when I see a mom who is able to close her foster care case with the Department of Children's Services, or when I see a mom who says, I got custody of my 7-year-old back because I've been to Renewal House, it just brings me a lot of joy. And so there are days where, even though I work hard, don't get me wrong, I feel like I'm not working, because I get a lot of satisfaction by seeing the positive, things that are happening in people's lives, and feeling like I have something to do with that. It's just so rewarding. So I think that's why I do what I do.
All right, Carol, frontline advocate, why do you do it?
That's right. So, well, I'll take you back to my family of origin, I guess. So I was raised in a big family where we were taught to believe in community, to believe in equity, to believe in justice. And my family's motto was that to believe is to care, and to care is to do. And so there's no choice. If you care about things, you got to do something about it, right? And I probably have a personality like Pam's, which is kind of a helper, So it was natural for me to build that doing into my work life. And then I built this community. Wherever I've been, there has been community of people who are different than I am. Right? People with disabilities, people with mental health issues, people with substance abuse disorders, people who are struggling in ways that sometimes I haven't, or sometimes I have. I can relate to them in some ways and not in others. But the richness in that, that it brings to your life to be engaged with people who are other, right? I was raised not to be scared of others, but to make sure that others had the same opportunities that I had. And so that really drives me. My mother put me to sleep at night singing an old folk hymn that the refrain of which is, I can't sing, so I'm not going to sing to you. Brighten the corner where you are. Brighten the corner where you are. Someone far from harbor you can help across the bar. Brighten the corner where you are. And so every day I just try to do that, and that keeps me going.
Well, thank you. And this has been a fabulous, fabulous panel and experience. And hopefully, and I know this to be a fact, actually, our participants have learned a lot. If nothing else, to have that level of, I won't say tolerance, I say grace, that we give to those who may not present themselves in the same way that you might. And to work with them and understand, and I always say this, if you knew most people as children, you would rewrite their story. Some people see people at the end of the game and they say, oh, they did this wrong, they're horrible, they made these mistakes. But if you knew them as children, that's why I always like us to concentrate on the children at the Weaver Center. If you knew them as a child, you would rewrite that whole story and you would understand. And so we need to make sure that we have a society that understands that we cannot have justice until it's justice for all the people as part of that. And so I thank this panel very much. I thank those who have participated, and we'll see you on our next Lunch and Learn. We do have a short survey. They're trying to remind me to make sure I bring this up, but I think it's more important to have the information, but we do like to better ourselves. So if there's a topic or information that you feel that we should cover, please let us know, because this is part of our mission, a very important part. So thank you very much, and I hope you all have a very good day. Thank you.
Thanks.